In the first talk, we explored what consciousness actually is. In the second talk, we looked at how consciousness becomes shaped by our body, our mind, our beliefs, our wounds, our experiences, the identity that we build up over time. And now we have come to perhaps the deepest spiritual question in this whole series. Where does consciousness actually come from? At this point, we need to be very clear about this one fact. There are things that science can tell us about consciousness, and there are things that spiritual teachings tell us about consciousness. Those facts are often not the same. So when we talk of spiritual truths, we must be aware that we don't misunderstand that science has proven these, nor do we ignore or trivialize them because science has not proven them. Science tells us and proves to us very clearly that our brain and our conscious experiences are closely connected, deeply connected. When something changes in the brain, many aspects of our experience will also change. For example, if someone has a brain injury, their memory, their personality, so much more would change, could change. Or when we are deeply asleep or under anesthesia or affected by certain drugs or medication, our conscious experience can change quite dramatically. Scientists believe that consciousness itself arises from the activity of the brain. This is important. Science believes that consciousness arises from the activity of the brain. They observe, well, science can observe that what is happening in the brain when you see something. So they observe that. They study what happens when you remember something. They study what happens when you feel fear or pleasure or sadness or pain. All of this is true. But there is still something that science has not completely explained. That deeper question for which science has no answer. Why is there an inner experience? What brings about that inner experience? Why does someone feel sad with one memory and another feels happy with the same memory? What makes us know that we are alive? And it can't be our breath or our breathing. Why? Because let's say there is a person who is in a very deep coma. They may still be breathing on their own, but they may not be aware of their body or their surroundings. And this is where spiritual teachings give us a far deeper knowledge. Spiritual teachings tell us that our deeper consciousness comes from our soul. And ultimately, that soul is connected to the universal or divine consciousness. From this perspective, the brain does not create that deep consciousness as science tells us. The brain gives consciousness a human form. The brain allows consciousness to operate through our senses, through our thoughts, our memories, our language, our emotions, our personality. Let's understand this with an example. Imagine a radio receiving music from a broadcasting station. This broadcasting station is not inside the radio. The radio does not create the original signal. It receives the signal and it turns that signal into a sound that we can hear. Now imagine that something happens to the radio. If the speaker is damaged, the music may sound distorted. If the tuning is poor, you may hear static interference. If some of the internal parts of the radio are damaged, you may hear only fragments of the music or no music at all. But this problem does not mean that the original broadcast has disappeared. It only means that the instrument, the radio, receiving that signal and expressing that signal is no longer working efficiently. In this analogy, universal or divine consciousness is like that broadcasting station from which the signal comes, which may be thousands of miles away. Our soul is our individual connection with that signal. And the soul is also what expresses what is being broadcast. Consciousness is the signal that is received. And the brain and the nervous system are the receiving instruments. They are like that radio that allows the signal to be received. The mind determines how the signal will be received. And the personality is the way that all of this gets expressed through us. So we are all connected spiritually to the same divine source. But we still experience and express life very differently. So let's take this same analogy even further and think of two radios receiving the same signal from the same broadcasting station. One may have a very clear speaker. Another may have interference. One may produce a deep, beautiful sound. Another, a very tinny sound. The signal is coming from the same source, the same broadcasting station. But what we actually hear depends upon the instrument through which it is being expressed. So that radio, receiving the signal, and the inner circuitry of that radio are very, very important. The brain and the nervous system constitute that radio, and the mind is that inner circuitry. Now, this helps us understand a very important point. If the brain is injured or the nervous system is affected by illness, medication, trauma, the inner circuitry, the mind, would be greatly affected, and a person's conscious experience can change in a very profound manner. Now, we don't really have much control over, let us say, accidents or illnesses or physical damage that may take place. But we do have quite a bit of control over healing ourselves from trauma. But it is important to first understand what trauma means. The brain and the nervous system are not affected only by physical illness or injury. They are also affected by painful experiences, emotional distress, childhood suffering, inner child wounds. And of course, as we know, spiritual teachings tell us that the past life experiences also determine the trauma energy that is trapped within us. So if you have lived through repeated fear, rejection, instability, emotional neglect, you may respond to life and life experiences in a very different manner. You may become suspicious, distrustful, anxious, easily triggered. You may struggle with intimacy, find it difficult or maybe even impossible to relax. And over time, certain beliefs can begin to form. Beliefs like, I am not safe. I cannot trust anyone. I have to stay in control. I am alone. There is something wrong with me. I am not worthy. Now imagine someone carrying this belief, I cannot trust anyone. And this person enters into a relationship. And if their partner does not return a call, which another person might simply think they're busy, they'll call back, this person's whole system may immediately say, see, I knew it. There's someone else in this person's life. People always let me down. This is always the scene that happens with me. The thoughts, the fear, the interpretation, the reaction are all shaped by an old wound or wounds, as the case may be. So trauma affects what we notice, what we expect from others, and what situations mean to us. That is the interpretation that we give to them. It also affects naturally our relationships and the choices that we make in our life. But trauma cannot destroy the soul. It affects the human instrument, yes, the brain, the nervous system, the mind. That is affected. All of it through which the soul is experienced and expressed. But it does not affect the soul itself. The soul remains untouched. Think of a window. There is bright light outside the window. But if the glass of the window has become covered with dust, layers of grime over the years, the light coming through that window will seem very dim. But it only seems that way because of the dirt. The light is not dim, nor has the light disappeared. The window is affecting how clearly that light can come through. In the same way, fear, pain, old beliefs, unresolved memories, trauma can and does color all our experiences. Of course, healing can make this better. But before we go into that, what is important to understand is that this soul, it's important to understand this soul that remains unaffected by the trauma. What is this soul? The soul is the deepest individual spiritual essence within a person. Let's repeat that. It is the deepest individual spiritual essence within a person. The personality is that part of us that gets shaped by family and culture and relationships and experiences and successes and failures and the many roles we play and the masks we wear. But the soul is something much deeper than all of this. The soul is that part of us that exists beneath the identities and the patterns, beneath all of this. The personality that is on top carries all the inner stories. But the soul is who you really are beneath all of these stories. But there is something else we need to understand, something that is important and something that is often misunderstood. Very important. Not every strong feeling that comes from inside of us is necessarily the voice of the soul. Fear has a voice. Desires have a voice. The wounded child within us has a voice. The ego has a voice. Our conditioning has a very loud voice. Anger has a voice. So simply saying, I feel this, and therefore it has to come from my soul, is wrong. You can't say, I feel this, so I am going to do this. Because it may turn out to be a wrong choice. So what is important is that we recognize the voice of the soul. The voice of the personality is often strident, loud, aggressive, abusive, condemning, judgmental, very often violent. The voice of the soul is quieter. It brings a sense of steadiness, calm, personal responsibility, compassion, a wider perspective. Now, this is very interesting. The soul does not always tell us to do the comfortable thing. In fact, very often I have found quite the opposite. Sometimes the deeper truth asks something very challenging of us. Example, it may ask you to have a conversation that you have been avoiding for so long. It may ask you to leave a situation that is unhealthy, but which you are remaining in because it has become a comfortable rut for you. It may ask you to openly, loudly admit, I was wrong, I am sorry. It may ask us to stop blaming someone else and instead look at our own behavior. It may ask us to set a boundary even though we are terrified of disappointing someone or terrified that they will reject us. So the difference is not that the voice of personality is unpleasant and the voice of soul is pleasant. No. There may still be fear. There may still be sadness. There may still be uncertainty, doubt. But beneath all of this, if there is a greater clarity, a wider perspective, no judgment, no resentment, more compassion, more willingness to forgive, to understand, a greater calm, more urging to look at yourself instead of blaming the other, then that is the voice of your soul. And consciousness speaks to us through the soul. So we have to learn to recognize the voice of the soul. Do not kid yourself. I got from inside that this person is to blame. Something told me that this person is a very nasty piece of work. The soul will never use such words. The soul will never tell you these things. These things that you hear loudly, which you are hearing loudly from within, is the voice of your personality, the voice of the fear, the voice of the wound, the voice of the belief. The soul is the light. The divine light that is present within us. It is the light that is constantly and eternally connected to Source. And because that Source is one, and all of us receive the light of the same Source, would it ever be possible for the soul to tell you that this person is a nasty piece of work, that all the blame rests with this person. Yes, the soul can certainly make you aware that there are games being played, so it can urge you to take action. It can most certainly suggest, advise that you set your boundaries. But it will never condemn another. Consciousness is the experience of the light, of the source that is present within us. I need you to be clear about this now that we are in part 3. Consciousness is the experience of the light of source that comes to us through our soul. It is consciousness that makes us aware of the light of the divine. The brain, the body, the mind, all of these allow that light to take on a human form. These are how we express our consciousness. These are how strongly or weakly we listen to and express the voice of our soul. Remember that radio we just spoke of? The broadcasting station, the source, is sending us all the same signal. It is as strongly sent to you as it is sent to me. But each one of us receives it so differently. Some don't receive it at all. All they hear is static. Some receive it in fits and starts. Some receive it loud and clear and continually. That does not mean that the person is not connected to source. That does not mean that the energy, the light, the frequency of source is not flooding, fueling, enriching, empowering the soul inside that person. It just means that if there is static, if that person is not receiving or receiving poorly, it just means that the voice of the personality, the instruments through which expression takes place, is, in a sense, damaged, traumatized. It draws our attention to the fact that healing is required. And whether that person is you or someone else, the bottom line remains the same. If you either don't receive, if your consciousness is not coming through, the consciousness of the divine light is not being expressed continually, strongly, deeply, it means that healing is required. So let's turn our attention to the healing that restores the expression of the soul. Because if the music that we are hearing through our radio is filled with static and interference and crackling, then we have to do something to repair that radio, to repair that inner circuitry that is the mind. So now that we know what the soul is, now that we also know that healing helps us to receive clearly. Healing does not create the light. Please understand that. Healing does not create the light. Healing does not create consciousness. Not at all. The light is, whether you heal yourself or not, the light is. The light has always been, the light shall always be, and the light is continually streaming to you into your soul. Whether you heal or you don't heal, that fact remains constant, unchanging. What healing does is remove what has been blocking or distorting the expression of the light, the expression of the soul, the experience of consciousness. I began my healing by looking at what appeared on the surface. I am an angry person. That's where I began my healing. At the most surface level, something that I could easily identify. But as I began looking more deeply, I discovered the grief that lay underneath the anger. And with time, as I dug even deeper, I found, to my joy, the love that lay underneath the grief. I was at one time someone who constantly needed control. And I discovered that it was fear that was making me take control. I was at one time someone who was obsessed with perfection, with applause, till I eventually recognized I am terrified that if I am not perfect, I will not be accepted, that I shall be rejected again. So you see, healing brings us closer to what is actually true. And as we become more truthful with ourselves, as we allow the layers to be uncovered, as we allow deeper consciousness to move through us with less distortion, we come closer to our truth. Now, this doesn't mean that I don't feel afraid anymore, that I never feel grief. And it certainly doesn't mean that I am not triggered, far from it. I am not someone who has stopped being human. I am someone who can now experience fear, anger, pain, triggers without being controlled by them. I can recognize that the trigger is within me. And so the blame, the judgmentalism, all of this has far less hold over me than it did earlier. And you know, that is a very different thing. that the triggers, the emotions do not control you or do not control you as strongly. And that is why healing is so important. People ask me, Elle, why do you do so many healing workshops? Because of this. My soul mission and my soul purpose for this lifetime is empowerment. Of course, starting with self-empowerment. It has to start with me. And all those tools and all those processes that helped me, that truly brought transformative changes and shifts within me, are what I offer in my classes and in my workshops. So healing the mother wound was a massive milestone in my healing journey. So I offered it. And the recorded workshop is there for any of you to help yourself. Understanding how the chakric zones hold both the soul energy and the karmic templates was an absolute aha moment when JF explained it to me. And so now I offer it to you as a workshop. In fact, that workshop is being repeated again on 22nd and 23rd of August, in case you want to attend. I know how important a role crystals and angelic energies have played in my personal healing and in the deepening of my consciousness. So, of course, I offer it to you in the Crystal Wisdom Workshop, which is taking place on 29th August. That is why I hold so many healing workshops. Self-empowerment is finally in your hands. I can offer you everything that has helped me to further my own journey of healing, of self-authority, of self-empowerment. People often say to me, Elle, I just want to be my authentic self. What does that even mean? What does that mean? Being authentic does not mean that if I'm angry and I say something cruel, I am being authentic. If I refuse to adjust myself to accommodate the needs of others with my own needs, am I expressing my authentic self? The authentic self is that personality that is living in closer alignment with the soul. That is the authentic self. It is your personality that is living in very close alignment, or as close as it can get, with your soul. That is the authentic self. So we must be able to know, to recognize, to name whatever we are feeling without any shame. We must be able to understand what we need. We must be able to recognize what matters to us. We must be able to take responsibility for our own wounds. And we must be courageous enough to speak truthfully. We must learn how to respect ourselves and how to respect other people. That authentic self that people are chasing after is not perfect. That authentic self is honest. It can say without shame or guilt, I was wrong. I overreacted. I said a lie. I am hurt. I need help. This is not acceptable to me. I forgive you, but I still need a boundary. I love you, but I will not abandon myself in order to keep loving you. That is the authentic self. Our personal spiritual consciousness does not ask us to make ourselves weak or to make ourselves disappear. It does not ask us to tolerate everything and anything. It doesn't ask us to be a martyr. We are not trying to become anybody or nobody. We are not trying to erase the humanness in us. We are transforming our personality so that it lives in closer alignment with our soul. So now let's move from personal consciousness to collective consciousness. In a very simple way, collective consciousness includes the beliefs, the values, the emotional patterns, the everything that is shared by a family, by a community, by a culture, by a country, and of course, on a wide scale, the world at large. So, for example, a family may have an unspoken rule. We don't talk about feelings. We don't hug. We don't say, I love you. Nobody ever makes this formal announcement. It is simply understood by the actions of the family member. Or a community may teach, men don't cry. A good woman sacrifices herself for everyone else. After hearing such messages for years, they no longer feel like ideas that we have learned. They begin to feel like our reality. These shared beliefs enter our personal consciousness, and frighteningly, they become our beliefs. And we don't even know that we have taken them from the collective consciousness. So I know people who will tell me, I don't know why I believe this about this community. Because my parents have so many good friends from this community. And I know that they are such nice people, but I still have this belief. Because you've taken that belief not from your family, you've taken it from the collective consciousness of the community or of the country that you live in. Now, this is very important. A belief does not become healthy simply because millions of people believe it. This is so important. So many times I have asked, well, why do you think this is true? And the answer I get is, everyone knows. Everyone believes this. Everyone is aware of this. I want to know who this everyone is. And does it mean that if a falsehood is said often enough by enough people, that it automatically becomes the truth? But it definitely can, unknown to you, become part of your consciousness, your personal consciousness, your beliefs. And remember what we learned in the beliefs catalyst. Beliefs are the instructions we give to our mind. We tell our mind, this is how you will react. Conscious living, therefore, asks us to examine not only our personal beliefs, but also the collective beliefs that we may have inherited, the family and ancestral patterns, the unresolved patterns that can continue through generations until somebody becomes conscious enough to face them, interrupt them, heal them, change them. And when that happens, personal healing becomes part of the collective healing. Just like the collective consciousness becomes part of the personal consciousness, personal healing in turn becomes part of the collective healing. So when I began to heal the mother wound within me, I set not only myself free, but in a very tangible, undeniable way, I helped my mother to set herself free from her own mother wounds. And the joy is this goes down the ancestry and it goes into my children and ahead. Healing backwards, healing forwards, because one person took the responsibility to interrupt the wound and heal it. Now, collective consciousness can go much deeper than a shared familial or social beliefs. Human beings affect one another at the level of consciousness. So please pay close attention to this. Fear moves through groups. Anger moves through groups. Prejudice spreads. We are seeing this in India. in Iran, in America, in other countries. But courage also spreads. Compassion also spreads. Honesty also spreads. Haven't we all had these experiences? For example, let's say everybody is nervous about something. One person enters the room and is calm and grounded and stable. And suddenly the steadiness of that one person begins to reduce the nervousness in everyone else in the room. Imagine a family where everybody avoids talking about something very painful. One person finally finds the courage to say, can we please be honest about what is happening and face the elephant in the room? And just that simple question gives other people the permission to start speaking. So the power of one is very real. One person can change the emotional life of an entire family and also of a lineage. One courageous action can awaken courage in other people. It took one Abhijit Dipke to mobilize the courage, the forthrightness, the fearlessness of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Remember, the consciousness that you repeatedly live through contributes to the collective field. I'm repeating again. The consciousness that you repeatedly live through contributes to the collective field. That is a responsibility you cannot shirk. That is what you are accountable for. Do you repeatedly live in fear, in bitterness, in lack of forgiveness, in mercilessness, in judgmentalism? Now you know what you are contributing to our world. Are you living repeatedly in compassion, understanding, forgiveness, authenticity, courage? Now you know what you are contributing to our world. I know you probably said yes to both. And yes, you may be contributing both compassion and judgmentalism, both bitterness and understanding. Of course. This does not mean that we should feel guilty every time an angry or fearful thought enters our mind. No. Thoughts will come and thoughts will go. It means that the patterns that we repeatedly live, those have consequences. If I repeatedly live to unhealed fear, if I repeatedly act from hatred, if I repeatedly think judgmental thoughts, these shall strengthen separation. These shall strengthen lack of harmony. But if I repeatedly keep choosing truth, compassion, responsibility, accountability, I shall help make those qualities more present in the world around me. None of us lives in complete isolation. Every person affects the whole, and the whole affects every person. And so when we make choices, this should be uppermost. Does my unconscious living affect only me? Does my refusal to heal and shift in any way add to the conflict in the world? And now we need to make another distinction. Universal or divine consciousness is not the same thing as collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is connected with humanity, our shared experiences, our belief systems, our emotional patterns, and their influence upon the human world. Universal or divine consciousness points to something much greater. It is the infinite living presence that is within creation, through creation, and beyond creation. It is not produced by human beings. It is not limited to human beings or to human emotions or to human beliefs and patterns. There are different names by which this universal divine consciousness has been referred to. Some call it God, some call it Source, some call it Brahman, divine intelligence, universal spirit, the one source. All these words point towards one fact. Beneath the appearance of separation, all of life exists within one sacred reality. And often we have been given the image of the ocean to understand this. Imagine universal divine consciousness as the ocean. Individual consciousness, personal consciousness is like a wave, one of the waves. There are so many waves. Collective consciousness is the movement created by all those waves together. Every wave has a particular shape. Some are large, some are very small, some move differently, but none of them is made from anything other than the ocean. So yes, we may be individual, yes. We may be separate from each other, yes, but we are not separate from the one source. Now, oneness does not erase our individuality. Oneness does not mean that the differences don't matter. Of course they do. And it definitely does not mean that every action is acceptable It does not mean that we should live without setting our personal boundaries. It does not mean that we should turn a blind eye to injustice. In fact, true spiritual unity increases the responsibility we have. If the life within you and the life within me ultimately arises from the same sacred source, then your suffering must matter to me. Your dignity must matter to me. The health of the earth must matter to me. The way I treat another human being must and does matter. So spirituality is not just about saying we are all one. If I say we are all one, but I continually mistreat people, then something is missing. If I speak beautifully about love, but ignore another person's suffering, then something is missing. If I talk about divine consciousness, but refuse to accept responsibility for the harm that I am causing to others, to collective consciousness, then something is missing. Oneness cannot exist without responsibility. Because if there is no responsibility, then oneness is a beautiful word, but an empty word. It has to become visible through the way in which we live, through our compassion, our truth, justice, respect, self-responsibility, the actions we take. We have come to the end of part 3. But I do want to talk about something that has often been asked of me. Elle, how can this person channel or teach such amazing spiritual knowledge and still commit X, Y, and Z wrongful acts? I was recently asked this when the whole Epstein file things blew up. And I'm not going to name names. But I do want to address this. Spiritual knowledge, spiritual experience is not the same thing as spiritual maturity. This distinction is extremely important. A person may truly have a powerful spiritual experience and may still have many unhealed wounds that affect his personality or her personality. Someone may experience an extraordinary feeling of oneness or unity during a meditation, but out of it may still be controlling or harsh or mean in their relationships. A third person may have visions. Some people enter very deep into states of meditation, but they still behave cruelly, take no responsibility for the harm they are causing. That spiritual experience, that spiritual knowledge is actually a door that is provided to them, opened by their own soul in order to give them the opportunity to take responsibility to heal themselves. But spiritual maturity will influence whether they actually walk through that door, how quickly they walk through it, do they actually heal themselves, how committed are they to their healing. Meditation does not create consciousness. So don't make it this extremely important thing that so many people make. Meditation does not create consciousness. Consciousness is already here. It is. What meditation can do is to help us become more aware of it. Help us to become more aware of what stands between us and the divine consciousness, our soul consciousness. We are not meditating so that we never feel pain. We do not seek to connect with divine consciousness so that our lives suddenly become all easy and a bed of roses. The purpose of touching consciousness, deeper consciousness, is to help ourselves live differently. And why is that important? Because consciousness is seeking to express something unique through you, through each one of us. Consciousness is seeking to express something unique through each individual human being. And unless you can close that distance between the unconscious reaction and conscious living, you may not be able to discover what this unique expression is. And sadly, you may never be able to express it. But there is always a small hint given to you by divine consciousness. What is that particular thing divine consciousness wants to express through you? It always gives you a small hint if you are aware of it. Here it is. What activity, what service gives you the greatest feeling of joy? Not the most money, not the most praise or validation, but a quiet, deep contentment and joy. That activity, that service holds the key to your unique soul expression, soul purpose. That unique expression of the divine presence that only you can provide. And you know, that expression changes as you evolve, as you heal, as you close the gap between personality and soul. For example, for many years, what gave me that deep joy was helping others to bring about transformation in their lives. And then this has evolved now, what it is at present, self-empowerment and empowerment. And who knows, maybe a few years from now, it may evolve even further. It may remain the same. What is important for me is that I, through my personality, continue to give daily expression to the voice of my soul. Daily expression to the divine consciousness that I'm connected with. So throughout this week, ask yourself at the end of every day, write this down. What kind of collective consciousness did I contribute to today? What did I contribute to collective consciousness? Ask this at the end of every day and be honest. And the answers could be you contributed to kindness, but you also contributed to being dishonest. So write down both, write down all. And also ask yourself, what activity or service that I did today brought me deep, complete, quiet joy? Part 4 will take us beyond just the talking of consciousness. Instead of only trying to understand this journey intellectually, I would like to attempt to take you through an experience where you shall move from your body through thoughts and emotions into the witness, into the soul, and finally, with divine grace, touch the deeper divine presence within which all life exists. Till then, because we are going through what I hope will be a really deep experience of consciousness, may I ask you to please listen once again to part 2 and 3 of the consciousness series, so that, of course, part 1, I'm hoping you've heard at least twice. If not, do hear that as well. So that part 4 really gives you that experience of consciousness, which is really deeply moving. Big hug. All my love.